Good morning, friends. Good morning, and welcome to another episode of PB Reads the Bible. This is midweek too, isn't it? This is Wednesday. This is Wednesday. Excuse me, Wednesday, the July 13th. Ooh. I'm PB. I'm the pastor here at Christ United Methodist Church. I love being the pastor here and love having this opportunity to join together with you, to be together in this way and at this time. As we journey through the Bible together. This is PB Reads the Bible, which we've been doing for a couple of years now, since December of 20. I don't recall now. We've been doing it for a while. I'll have to go back and look. We've gone through a whole bunch of books of the Bible. And this is episode, I just closed it up to 26. Episode 26 on our journey through the book of 1 Samuel. And I wasn't sure, but I think we're going to finish 1 Samuel today and then start fresh with 2 Samuel tomorrow. We'll see. We're going to get through chapter 30, and then I might just decide at the last moment, just depending on what time it is today. So regardless, we're going to finish 1 Samuel either today or tomorrow, and then we're just going to move right into 2 Samuel, keeping them together because, as I said initially, they were one book, and in the Hebrew Bible, they still are one book. I shouldn't say they were originally one book. They were originally one scroll, and somebody decided to split them into two because it was too big, I guess. Other announcements. I don't think I have too many other announcements. Join us for worship. Of course, worship on Sunday, 8:15 and 10:45 in person. 10:45 will also be live streamed. Newsletter is going to be coming out in about a week and a half. We're working on plans for various things in the fall. I think things are going to be exciting. Fall and winter, things are going to be exciting. So stay tuned for some of those announcements. But for now, for today, just that announcement about worship. And if you join us online at 10:45, prepare yourself and prepare your worship space. Make things ready so you can be focused. For now, though, go ahead and check in. Let me know that you're there. This is Romper Room roll call time. Cheryl's already done that. Good morning to Cheryl. Good to see you this morning. Today is a nice cool morning, but again, it's supposed to get pretty hot and humid. Triple H day, I think. Hazy, hot, and humid. So be safe, folks. Make sure you're staying hydrated, drinking water, and that's what this is in my mug. Not coffee today, just water. So go ahead and drink lots, and let's check on people that you're concerned about, that elderly folks who have health issues that might be exacerbated by the heat and humidity. Make sure we're checking on our neighbors, being those good neighbors that God calls us to be, that Jesus requires of us. Good morning, Shar. Good to have you with us this morning. Also, just keep each other in prayer. And so if there's something you wanted prayer about, please put it there in the comment section or send me the text 570-351-1619. Reminder to please keep Jolene Haywood and her family in your prayers, as Jolene's journey seems to be drawing to a close. She shared with me yesterday, I wish this journey didn't last so long, this segment of her journey. So she has a beautiful spirit, and always has, but and she's got a really good attitude going in here. So just keep everybody in your prayers. John and Cindy, good morning. Great to have you folks joining with us live this morning. Hey, I know some folks aren't able to join live. That's fine. You go ahead and check in no matter what time it is you're looking. I saw yesterday we had some folks checking in later in the day. And so that's wonderful. I appreciate the fact that you're taking time, whenever it is you're taking time to be part of our small group. So we keep all of us in prayers, not just Cheryl, Shar, and Cindy and John, but those of you who typically join us and watch at other times, you're in my prayers as well. That's why I go back in there and look at those things and pray that God is speaking to you through these things. All right. So we're going to get into it. It's 9:05. Excuse me. This is episode 26 on our journey through 1 Samuel, and we're going to be looking at chapter 30. I think we're also going to do chapter 31 because chapter 31 is a brief one, and it ends, well, it draws this story to an end, and we'll see specifically why and exactly why they split it at this point. Bill and Pat are willing to, yep. Yes, indeed. That's right. Bill and Pat Short, good friends of ours, good, wonderful sister and brother from the congregation here at CUMC, and have been here for quite some time, are leaving today. Yeah, they might even already be on the road. I'm sure they wanted to get started early, and we love them, and they certainly will be missed. But they might. They're at the very least they're packing, if not already on the road. And prayers for safe travels for them. Keep them in your prayers. Okay, so back to this chapter 30. 31 is where 1 Samuel ends, and you're going to see why. Perhaps by now you've already kind of figured out, because there's been enough foreshadowing about what's going to be taking place in chapters 30 and 31. But just as a reminder of 29, remember 29 from yesterday, David has been dismissed, so to speak, from the battle. He was painted himself into a corner. We were wondering, what was going to happen? And because the commanders of the Philistines didn't trust him because he and his men were Hebrews, King Achish sent him back to Ziklag. Go back to Ziklag and please be careful, and all that. So, and he leaves the next morning. So continuing, picking up from there, chapter 30, verse 1. Now when David and his men came to Ziklag on the third day, pause. So he's been away at least 3 days. They've been away at least 3 days. Continuing. The Amalekites had made a raid on the Negeb and on Ziklag. They had attacked Ziklag, burned it down, and taken captive the women and all who were in it, both small and great. They killed none of them, but carried them off and went their way. Pause. Okay. So the Amalekites, here they are again, right? The Amalekites have been troublesome right from the beginning, it would seem. In fact, in Exodus, they're inserted in there in Exodus as an afterthought almost to help set this up, because for various reasons, right? And to show that they've always been their enemy. They really haven't always been, but they're trying to make it seem that way. But throughout this story, they've always been an enemy. And the Amalekites were the ones that Saul got in trouble with because he had not listened to presumably Yahweh's instruction through Samuel that he put everyone to the sword and take nothing, just burn everything, burn it to the ground. And because he didn't listen, your victory will not be as great as it could have been, and all that kind of stuff. And eventually God, as Samuel speaking for God, said, your kingdom will be torn away from you. Good morning, Marcia, checking in. Awesome. And so the Amalekites were there at the beginning of this story with Saul. Now we get here to the end, and we see the Amalekites and David. Now, remember also just from a couple chapters ago when David was doing his little raids, and we can see this also not only as the Amalekites against like just that constant enemy of Israel, but we can also see this raid by the Amalekites upon Ziklag and the Negeb as retaliation for some of the things that David and his men have been doing. Remember, David has been raiding various places. And even though he killed everyone, perhaps some word got out somehow. These are the Amalekites, not Achish, so they were a little closer to where these things took place, and they might have figured out who it was. And they attacked Ziklag as retaliation in his absence. Certainly plausible. And if you're going to attack someplace, you're going to do it in, if you're going to wait until the vast army is gone, so to speak. But remember, in David's raids, he killed everyone. That was because he didn't want the word to get out. He didn't want the word to get out. The Amalekites don't do that. The Amalekites merely raid the place and kidnap everyone. Excuse me. Whoever was left behind. We can see men in there, probably older men or ill men, infirm, who were unavailable for military service or unacceptable for military service, as well as women of all ages and children. So, but rather than kill everyone, it says they don't kill anyone. They just take them away, which is probably more like what the usual practice was at the time, either to make them into slaves to do your bidding, or to hold them as ransom and sell them back to the people whom you conquered. Most likely one of or both of those cases. And killing everyone, wouldn't have done any good. They weren't trying to hide it. They weren't afraid of people knowing who it was that had attacked Ziklag. So picking up from there, verse 3, when David and his men came to the city, they found it burned down, and their wives and sons and daughters taken captive. Then David and the people who were with him raised their voices and wept until they had no more strength to weep. David's two wives also had been taken captive, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel. David was in great danger. Pause. The NRSV actually gets that wrong. Danger doesn't really fit the Hebrew. The NIV translates it as great distress, and that is that's more accurate. Great danger would be something coming from the outside, whereas what the Hebrew is describing is trouble from within. So he is under great distress inside, filled with anxiety and worry and all that kind of stuff building up inside of him. Okay, so David was in great distress, for the people spoke of stoning him, because all the people were bitter in spirit for their sons and daughters. But David strengthened himself in Yahweh his God. Pause. So they get there, they see what's happened, and David's men are upset with David. They're more than just upset. They're really ticked off at David. They're probably blaming him for this whole thing, because you took all of us to go away on this military campaign that we ended up not going in on, when you should have left at least some of us back here to protect Ziklag, to protect our wives and our children. But you left no one here to protect them in our absence, so it's your fault. And it says they even considered, they were even talking about stoning him. So David is in great distress over all of this. But David strengthened himself in Yahweh, his God. So this speaks, the author, the editors, they're speaking of David's great faith, that he has faith in God, in Yahweh. In Yahweh, in spite of his great distress. Faith in Yahweh does not necessarily take away great distress, right? It can still be in that situation, but in spite of that situation, can still have that faith, that trust in God. Picking up from there, David said to the priest Abiathar, son of Ahimelech, "Bring me the ephod." So Abiathar brought the ephod to David. David inquired of the Lord, "Shall I pursue this band? Shall I overtake them?" He answered him, "Pursue, for you shall surely overtake and shall surely rescue." So David set out, he and the 600 men who were with him. Pause. So David consults with Yahweh, using through the priest and through the ephod, and he receives the message back from God. Yes, pursue them. Now, this is a difference between, we see a difference between David and Saul. We've seen multiple ones, right? Of course, when Saul was most recently asking, he got no answer. Of course, he was using those ritualistic things, and that's part of the point here. With David, the old systems are gone. With David, we now see a more direct line, you might say, and David consults God in a different way than prior ones. He is still using the ephod, but he's like doing it himself. It sounds like maybe he's still using Abiathar. We're not 100% sure on that, but he gets the answer. But here's the other difference. He doesn't specifically ask God what to do. Saul had no plan whatsoever and wanted God to tell him what to do. David basically has a plan. All he asks for is, should I put this plan into motion? He asks God, shall I pursue them? So he's got the plan of pursuing them. God says, yep, go for it. And now he's putting his plan, now he puts his plan into action. So whereas Saul had no plan and was not a man of action until other people forced the action, David has the plan and is a man of action. We see a much different type of person. And this is, we would say, a kingly characteristic. So continuing, repeating from there. So David set out, he and the 600 men who were with him. They came to the Wadi Besor, where those stayed who were left behind. Pause. That's a weird description, but it would be people who were too weak to travel the rest of the way. Perhaps, so a couple hundred of his men, by the sound of it, because we're going to see 400 continue with David. So about 200 of them are just exhausted for whatever. I can't go any further. And so David leaves them there. And presumably, we're not told here, but this is spoiler alert, they're left with the baggage. They're left with the baggage. So that David and the remaining troops can move more quickly. They don't have to carry all the rest of this stuff with them. So it's a good thing, actually. But these 200 were left behind there on the Wadi Besor. Continuing, but David went on with the pursuit. He and 400 men, 200 stayed behind, too exhausted to cross the Wadi Besor. In the open country, they found an Egyptian and brought him to David. They gave him bread and he ate. They gave him water to drink. They also gave him a piece of fig cake and 2 clusters of raisins. When he had eaten, his spirit revived, for he had not eaten bread or drunk water for 3 days and 3 nights. Then David said to him, "To whom do you belong? Where are you from?" He said, "I am a young man of Egypt, servant to an Amalekite. My master left me behind because I fell sick 3 days ago. We had made a raid on the Negeb of the Kerethites, and on that which belongs to Judah, and on the Negeb of Caleb, and we burned Ziklag down." Pause. Aha. So one might say providentially, David and his troops on their way chasing after this band of Amalekites finds a slave wandering in the desert, a young Egyptian man, slave of the Amalekites, wandering there in the desert. We would say providentially, right? Because of this man, they are able to find out some wonderful information, and they find out that he is from the band that did indeed attack Ziklag, the raiding party that attacked Ziklag and took all their people away, their wives, their spouses, and their children. But we see in here We see and hear a character of David. We see some compassion from David and for this man, because he doesn't, well, first of all, he doesn't kill him like right off the bat or start torturing him or questioning him right away. He first feeds him. He like welcomes him into their group, you might almost say. He feeds him, he gives him water, he refreshes him. Then he asks him some questions once the man has enough strength to answer. Doesn't do it through torture. He gains his information by being nice to the guy, and finds out that he is from the raiding party that they were looking for. Boom. Continuing, verse 15. David said to him, "Will you take me down to this raiding party?" He said, "Swear to me by God that you will not kill me or hand me over to my master, and I will take you down to them." Pause. So the guy agrees, just don't kill me. Just don't kill me. And we see again David's compassion and sympathy. And he does not kill the guy. He makes the agreement, and the guy takes him. So when he, the boy, the young man, the slave, had taken him down, they were spread out, the Amalekites, that is, were spread out all over the ground, eating and drinking and dancing, because of the great amount of spoil they had taken from the land of the Philistines and from the land of Judah. Pause. So we have this picture of them thinking that we're too far away. We're safe, right? We're safe. We're far away from the land of Judah. We're far away from everybody that we just raided. And we can have this moment. We can have this relaxing time to enjoy some of the things that we have stolen. And so they have this wild party where they're eating and drinking. Picking up from there, verse 17, David attacked them from twilight until the evening of the next day. Not one of them escaped except 400 young men who mounted camels and fled. David recovered all that the Amalekites had taken, and David rescued his 2 wives. Nothing was missing, whether small or great, sons or daughters, spoil or anything that had been taken. David brought back everything. David also captured all the flocks and herds which were driven ahead of the other cattle. People said, "This is David's spoil." Pause. So David had a plan. David puts his plan into action. And we see here in this part of the story, this part of the plan, that David is indeed a man of action and a great warrior. He and his men, he participates in this whole thing. And they have a battle which rages basically all night and into the next day, or something like that, all day long. It's a long battle. He and his 400 men against this raiding party of the Amalekites. We don't know how many there were. A lot, apparently, because over about 400 of them escape. But it must have been, at least the way the author is telling the story, the narrator, is that there must have been thousands that in this raiding party. It doesn't seem logical, but go with the story, right? But they recover everything. And then some. The way it's described, they not only get back what they had, but they're also able to acquire the spoils that the Amalekites had gotten from those other raids into Judah territory and whatnot, as well as the stuff, the provisions that the Amalekite raiding party must have had of their own. And David captures it all. And those last few words are very important, okay? They got all this stuff, and people said, "This is David's spoil." In other words, all of the stuff is David's. All the stuff that we've gathered, other than what was ours, is David's. That's what you would do with a victorious king. That's what you would do with a victorious king. That would be their spoils of war. And so even though David isn't king, his people are treating him as a king, a victorious king in this battle. Interesting. All right. Continuing from there. Then David came to the 200 men who had been too exhausted to follow David. and who had been left at the Wadi Besor. They went out to meet David and to meet the people who were with them. When David drew near to the people, he saluted them. Then all the corrupt and worthless fellows among the men who had gone with David said, because they did not go with us, we will not give them any of the spoil that we have recovered, except that each man may take his wife and children and leave. Pause. Now, that would certainly sound reasonable, right? And that was probably the regular pattern. If you wanted parts of the spoil, you had to participate in the battle. If you wanted a part in the spoil, you had to participate in the battle. And if you didn't participate, you didn't get anything, or you got much less than anybody else. That's what they want. They want to continue that practice, these corrupt and worthless fellows who would seem to be thinking only of themselves. What's David going to do? David said, because they did not go with us, we will not give them any of the spoil. Oh, no, I'm sorry. But David said, this is verse 23. I read too far back. 23. But David said, you shall not do so, my brothers, with what Yahweh has given us. He has preserved us and handed over to us the raiding party that attacked us. Who would listen to you in this matter? For the share of the one who goes down into the battle shall be the same as the share of the one who stays by the baggage. They shall share alike. From that day forward, he made it a statute and an ordinance for Israel. It continues to the present day. Pause. So David, perhaps, at least in part, being influenced by what he has seen in the world and what he has experienced in the world, being, the eighth son, who is usually pushed, apparently mistreated perhaps by his brothers and etc., and not receiving an equal portion of things, but should have been, or felt he should have been, and seeing how other people have been treated, and seeing that most of the 600 people who are with him were parts of those Hebrews, the poor people who were pushed down. David wants to change the economic policy. He wants to change how things are done and have an equitable distribution of money, an equitable distribution. He's redistributing wealth. He is redistributing the wealth and make sure that everyone gets the same thing. And actually, that's if you read anything about piracy or watch any movies and stuff about pirates, that's what they did. Whoever you were on the ship, you got a portion, an equal portion in the spoils of the war. Perhaps the captain got more, but everybody else got the same. And that's, now notice the wording in there, okay? From that day forward, he made it a statute and an ordinance. He made it a statute and an ordinance. Who makes statutes? Who makes ordinances? The king. David, though he's not a king, is making kingly decisions and policies that have lasting effect. He is acting the king, even if he is not king in name. He is acting as king indeed. Now, so far, we have seen, and just in this story, we've seen 2 times when David has shown compassion and mercy upon people, we might say, because that Egyptian slave, treating him well, giving him food, giving him water, not torturing him, not killing him, and gaining information from him. And here we see him again coming down on the side of compassion, charity, mercy, and wanting this equitable distribution of wealth amongst all of his subjects, we might say, at this point in time, all of his men. We're now going to see a third incident of him being generous, kind, compassionate. Generous is probably the best word too for this one. in each case, there are some ulterior motives for David. Now, maybe he is just a compassionate, generous person, but he is gaining something each time. By being generous and kind and compassionate to that Egyptian slave, he gained information that he needed, and he was brought to a location that he needed to find. By being compassionate, generous, and merciful to the men who were left behind, he gained popularity, I'm sure, by them and by all of them, if they understood that this is the way it's going to be. So next time, if you're not able to participate in the battle, you're still going to get your equal share of the spoils of war. Now we're going to see David do it a third time. When David came to Ziklag, he sent part of the spoil to his friends, the elders of Judah, saying, "Here is a present for you from the spoil of the enemies of Yahweh." Pause. Boom. So it's a third time he's being generous. All the extra spoils were given to David, right? This is David's spoil because he's king. You got like the victorious kingly share, so to speak. But he's sending stuff to his friends, the elders of Judah. And this is a present from you from the spoil of the enemies of Yahweh. So he's doing two things with this. Yes, he's being generous. Yes, he's being generous and kind and compassionate because some of them may have lost stuff in raids by the Amalekites. So he's returning some of their wealth. But he is laying foundation for himself. This is a political act, we might say. He is laying foundation for himself among the leaders of the tribes of Judah, who will become the first ones to claim him as king in 2 Samuel. Okay, so he's laying this foundation. He is also setting up a dichotomy here in his wording, or the author is in his wording, because he sent the spoil to his friends, and this spoil is a gift from a gift recovered from the enemies of Yahweh. The author, the narrator, seems to be setting up this dichotomy. You're either a friend of David or you're an enemy of Yahweh. Almost like there's no in between. You're one or you're the other. You're a friend of David or you're an enemy of Yahweh. And now let's listen to this list of places and of tribes to which he sent spoils. Verse 27, it was for those in Bethel, in Ramoth of the Negeb, in Jatir, in Eraor, in Sifmoth, in Eshtemoa, in Rachal, in the towns of the Jerahmeelites, in the towns of the Kenites, in Hormah, in Borashan, in Athach, in Hebron, all the places where David and his men had roamed. Boom. Period. End of chapter 30. So it's a listing, right? This is like a roll call of the tribes of Judah, especially some of the most powerful places in Judah, ending with Hebron or Hebron, depending on how you want to pronounce it. I've heard it both ways. Ending with Hebron, which we will see is David's first royal city. Royal city. They're like the first ones that claim him as king. It's where he's established king, whatever, and it's where he sets up his capital. It's where he sets up his capital, the capital of his kingdom. All right. So 834. Shall we continue? Sure, let's. It's only 13 verses in chapter 31, and we'll finish up 1 Samuel today, and then we'll start up tomorrow with 2 Samuel. All right. And what's left to happen in 1 Samuel, you probably already know it, but Saul's death. Typically, a book is going to end, especially a book in the Bible, and when you're going to divide them up, you're going to pick like the ending of something. and quite often it is the ending of a life or a reign. And so here it is the end of Saul. The end of Saul. Basically, the kingdom is no longer his. Nothing is left to him except his life and the life of his children. Right. So here we go. And Samuel is given this. Samuel's ghost has predicted that this is what's going to happen. So we might as well just read it. 31. Now the Philistines fought against Israel, and the men of Israel fled before the Philistines, and many fell on Mount Gilboa. The Philistines overtook Saul and his sons, and the Philistines killed Jonathan and Abinadab and Malchishua, the sons of Saul. The battle pressed hard upon Saul. The archers found him, and he was badly wounded by them. Then Saul said to his armor-bearer, "Draw your sword and thrust me through with it, so that these uncircumcised may not come and thrust me through and make sport of me." Pause, even though it's the middle of the verse, pause there. All right, so battle's not going well. Everything that Samuel has predicted is coming true. Israel is losing this battle. It was kind of foretold as well in the mention of Aphek, that they were going to be going through Aphek, and the battle doesn't take place there, although perhaps some of it does, but not the whole thing. Parts of it are taking place elsewhere. It's gone up to Mount Gilboa. And Saul's sons are killed first, or three of them anyway. One of them lives and will play a part in 2 Samuel. But Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchishua are dead. And Saul has been struck by the archers, but Saul, in one last almost heroic or valorous decision, a decision of a king, actually, you might say, is one of kill me. He turns to his armor bearer and says, "Kill me, so that those people can't kill me," so that it won't be left for them to do, thinking that any honor and respect that I might have left and that the people of Israel might have left is wrapped up in me and would be completely taken away if I'm captured alive and paraded around and tortured. That would take away any respect or any honor, and it would completely destroy Israel. And he might not be wrong. His armor bearer doesn't want to do it, maybe because he's too attached to Saul and he doesn't want to, or perhaps because he is afraid of being the one guilty of raising his hand to the Lord's anointed, to Yahweh's anointed. So he doesn't want to do it. So Saul, in his very last act, and again, perhaps valorous, chivalrous act, is to fall upon his sword, to kill himself, to commit suicide. Now, the armor bearer is so perhaps distraught, or perhaps because he realizes, I'm the last one here. I don't want to be captured and tortured. I'm going to do the same thing. That's what we're going to find out. Oh, that was a spoiler because he didn't actually do those things yet. Sorry. So finishing up this verses. But his armor bearer was unwilling, for he was terrified. So Saul took his own sword and fell upon it. Now, pause. What was he terrified of? He might also have been terrified of the Philistines. So continuing. So Saul took his own sword and fell upon it. When his armor bearer saw that Saul was dead, he also fell upon his sword and died with him. So Saul and his 3 sons and his armor bearer and all his men died together on the same day, just as Samuel's ghost had foretold. When the men of Israel who were on the other side of the valley and those beyond the Jordan saw that the men of Israel had fled and that Saul and his sons were dead, they forsook their towns and fled, and the Philistines came and occupied them. Pause. So some of these Israelite territories and cities were abandoned. Towns and cities were abandoned, and the Philistines now occupy them, just as his ghost had predicted. Continuing, the next day, when the Philistines came to strip the dead, they found Saul and his 3 sons fallen on Mount Gilboa. Pause. Apparently, they weren't. apparently they weren't looking for Saul and his sons. They weren't looking for him. They perhaps didn't even know yet that he had died. They were just going through all the dead. That would be a regular practice. Strip the dead of anything valuable. Armor is valuable. Armor is valuable. Weaponry is valuable. Maybe a bag with a few coins in it. That's going to be valuable. Some form of canteen or skin, water skin, would be valuable. All these things would be valuable. And yes, that would have been a regular practice. In many cases, it probably still is today. I'm not in the military, but even if you watch World War II documentaries or movies, that takes place. So you read it in books about World War II. It was an activity that took place. And of course, Civil War. You take weaponry, you take bullets, ammunition from the dead, whether they were on your side or the other side. Continuing. But they came across, they found Saul and his sons. How did they know it was them? Well, maybe some of them actually recognized them, but more likely the type of armor and weaponry that they had would have been, a little bit special compared to everybody else. So that what they were wearing. Continuing, they cut off his head, stripped off his armor, and sent messengers throughout the land of the Philistines to carry the good news to the houses of their idols and to the people. Pause. Cutting off the head seemed to be a way to just desecrate bodies and stuff like that. Think back to David with Goliath. David with the giant. He did the same thing. After killing him, he cut off his head. They stripped him. They and we're going to see here, they put his armor in the temple of Astarte. Pause. That would have been a Canaanite goddess. And so just as they put the Ark of the Covenant in the temple of Dagon, and as the Israelites had put Goliath's sword and various armor in the sanctuary and sacred places. All right, so this is a typical thing, a way of desecrating the body, a way of showing the power of their God over the God of the Israelites. And they fastened his body to the wall of Beth-shan. It says his body. We don't know if that includes his head or not, but perhaps it does. We would hope that it does, although not attached. And I say we hope it does because of what happens next. But when the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead heard what the Philistines had done to Saul, all the valiant men set out, traveled all night long, and took the body of Saul and the bodies of his sons from the wall of Beth-shan. They came to Jabesh and burned them there. Then they took their bones and buried them under the tamarisk tree in Jabesh and fasted 7 days. End of chapter 31, end of 1 Samuel. So just to wrap it up, the Jabesh Gilead, we remember those. The name, boom, maybe strikes a memory or not. If not, you turn back to the very early parts of this book, this story, and they were the ones who were having a problem with the king Ammon, and Saul rushed right in with troops and rescued Jabesh Gilead when others would not, because he had heard about them, and yeah, there was connections and all that stuff. But they remember. They look backwards, past the most recent failures of Saul, back to this early connection and to a time when he showed promise of the kind of king he could be, whereas the kind of king he became, a king that failed. And the story seems to be ending with that, with showing the promise versus the reality, and how this experiment in kingship in Israel seems to have been a failure, perhaps even in the same way as the experiment of the judges had ended in failure. And we're left, if this is where the story ends, we're left wondering and thinking, how can Israel survive? How can the land of Judah and the land of Israel, and how can it survive? That's how. And so that's how 1 Samuel ends. Excuse me. But these people of Jabesh Gilead, they remember, they look back and they remember the promise of Saul's kingship. They remember what he did do for them, was able to accomplish on their behalf. And they immediately run to get his bodies and his body and the bodies of his sons, to try to save some decorum and to give them the honorable treatment and burial that they should have. So, my friends, 9:45. Thanks for bearing with me and sticking with me this morning or whenever it is you're watching. I do pray that this has been beneficial for you, that you've learned something or relearned something, and that God has spoken to you in some way. As you go through your days, not just today, but every day, keep those eyes and ears, physical and spiritual, open to everything that God is doing, our living, loving, active God is doing in your life and in the lives of those around you. When you see it, when you hear it, say, thank you, God, and then tell somebody about it. Until we meet again, my friends, be blessed. Be blessed. Bye.